Karen stood on my porch screaming at the top of her lungs, waving her phone as she called 911. "There's a man trespassing in my neighborhood," she yelled. She had no idea she was trying to evict a federal officer from my own home. 15 minutes later, the same officer she called stood frozen as I pulled out my badge. "She's the one who broke the law," I said, and then I arrested her myself. The tires of my old pickup truck crunched against the gravel driveway as I pulled into my house for the first time in over a year. I turned the engine off and let the silence settle. For the first time in months, there were no screaming radios, no helicopter blades, no whispered comes in my ear, just the chirping of birds and the rustle of trees in the wind. I was finally home. My house sat on the edge of a tidy, quiet neighborhood, one of those suburban developments where every lawn was trimmed like it was part of a golf course, but mine stood out. Overgrown hedges, mailbox a little crooked, a layer of dust on the windows. It hadn't been lived in for over a year, and it looked the part. I didn't mind. I had bigger plans than aesthetics. I had just gotten back from an overseas deployment. I can't say where, and I won't say exactly what I was doing, but I'll tell you this. I wasn't lounging around. I'm a federal agent. Counterintelligence means long stretches in places where your own name feels fake, where sleep comes second to mission, and where coming home doesn't feel real until you turn the key in your own front door. I had been dreaming about that moment for months. I opened the door, walked into the stale air, and let out a long breath. This was mine. No more briefing rooms, no more sleeping with one eye open. I was finally back in my place of peace. I unloaded my bags slowly, appreciating the little things: my worn leather chair, the faint smell of pine from the old wooden floorboards, the dent in the wall from where I tripped with a suitcase years ago. Everything was exactly how I left it. I took a long shower, unpacked only what I needed for the night, and crashed early. The next morning I was up at dawn, ready to get my house back in shape. I brewed coffee and stepped outside with a rake in hand. That's when I saw her. She was already watching me, arms crossed, standing on the sidewalk like she owned the pavement. Late 50s, short platinum blonde bob, oversized sunglasses that barely hid her disapproving frown. She wore a bright pink tracksuit and held a clipboard like it was a sword. She made a beeline for me like she had rehearsed it. "Excuse me," she said sharply, as if I had already offended her. "Can I help you?" I looked around, slightly confused. "Nope, just cleaning up my yard." "This is private property," she said, with an edge that suggested she was used to people not challenging her. "I don't recognize you. Who gave you permission to be here?" I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because it was so unexpected. "This is my house. I live here." "No," she said, tapping her clipboard. "The Davis family lived here. They left last year." "I'm Ray. I am the Davis family," I replied, keeping my tone friendly but firm. "I've owned this house for 7 years. I was overseas for work." She narrowed her eyes behind her giant sunglasses. "Overseas? What kind of work?" "That's not your business," I said calmly. "But I'm back now. Everything's legal. You don't have to worry." "Well, I'm the head of the HOA," she said, lifting her chin, "and no one told me anything about you moving back. There are protocols. This neighborhood has standards." "Right," I said, nodding slowly. "I'll be sure to send you a postcard next time I leave the country." She didn't appreciate the joke. She clicked her pen, scribbled something on a clipboard, and said, "I expect this yard cleaned by the end of the day. Weeds are a violation." With that, she turned and walked away like she had just delivered a royal decree. I stood there, rake in hand, blinking in disbelief. I had been home less than 12 hours, and already I was being bossed around by some clipboard tyrant in neon pink. Later that day, I spoke with an old neighbor who had been watching from across the street. Mr. Patel, retired schoolteacher, kind as ever. He chuckled and shook his head. "That's Karen. You'll get used to her. Thinks she runs the whole neighborhood." "She said she's head of the HOA." "She was," he said. "Got voted out 6 months ago. Too many complaints. She still walks around like she's in charge. Don't let her get to you." That night, I thought it would all blow over. I figured maybe Karen just needed to be reminded that not everything was under her control anymore. I was wrong. The next morning, I walked outside and found a huge sign staked into my front yard. "Private property. Nitrogen monoxide trespassing." Under OAG Spoochie, there were orange cones lining the driveway. A printed letter was taped to my mailbox, claiming that the HOA was investigating ownership disputes and asking me to vacate the property until proper residency is confirmed. I stared at it for a full minute. This wasn't just annoying anymore, it was aggressive. The letter wasn't official. It didn't have a signature, just a phony HOA logo at the top and some legal-sounding nonsense. I knew immediately who was behind it. That afternoon, I knocked on Karen's door. She answered with a smug smile. "I'm not sure what you think you're doing," I said, "but putting fake notices on my house is illegal." "I don't think you understand how things work here," she said. "We have standards. You can't just appear and expect everything to go your way." "I don't need it to go my way," I said. "I just need it to go the legal way, and I own that house." "We'll see about that," she said, starting to close the door. "If you don't leave by tomorrow, I'm calling the police." I called. Stuck my foot gently against the doorframe, not hard, not aggressive, just enough to make her pause. Call them, I said. In fact, I look forward to meeting them. That night I installed security cameras for a total, covering every angle. I also pulled out the manila folder from my deployment file containing my property documents, mortgage records, and proof of ownership. I had it ready, just in case. Not because I was worried, but because I had a feeling Karen wasn't done. People like her don't back down when they think they've lost control. They double down. Sure enough, the next day I was relaxing on my porch with a glass of iced tea when I heard her voice again, this time louder, panicked. I'm calling 911. She yelled from the sidewalk, phone held high like it was a torch. There's a man squatting at 1427 Maple Lane. He's dangerous. She was putting on a show now, pacing back and forth, waving her arms like I had attacked someone. I just sat there, sipping my tea, waiting. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled in. I stood, calm and collected. I had my documents in one hand and something else in my back pocket, something Karen didn't know about. As the officers stepped out, she ran to them dramatically. "That's him," she shouted, pointing at me. "He broke into that house and won't leave. He says it's his, but I know it's not." The younger officer turned to me, eyes cautious. "Sir, can we speak with you?" I smiled. "Absolutely. I've been expecting you." And in that moment I knew Karen had made her final mistake. The 2 officers approached slowly, one slightly ahead of the other. They looked young, mid-30s maybe, both in pressed uniforms and mirrored sunglasses. They were polite, but tense, as if unsure whether they were stepping into a heated domestic dispute or a genuine crime scene. I could see it in their posture, how they kept one hand near their belts, scanning for signs of threat. Karen stood nearby, arms folded, tapping her foot with all the smug authority she could muster. I stepped off the porch and walked to meet them on the driveway, making sure my hands were visible and calm. "Afternoon, officers. I heard you were coming, sir," said the one on the left, Officer Mills, reading from a small notepad. "We got a 911 call about a potential squatter on this property. Are you the current resident?" I nodded. "Yes, I am. Ray Davis. I've owned this house for 7 years. Been away on federal deployment. Just got back." Mills looked up. "Do you have proof of ownership?" "Of course," I said. I handed over a clean folder with everything from my deed to recent tax records and homeowner documents. I had even printed out a current snapshot of the county's online property database. My name was right there in bold. The second officer, whose name tag read Jenkins, took the folder and flipped through it. He gave a low whistle and looked to his partner. "This all checks out." But Karen wasn't having it. "That's fake," she snapped. "I've never seen this man before. The Davises left ages ago. How do we know that's really him? Anyone could make fake documents these days." I turned to her and, still holding back a smirk, said, "Karen, your time pretending to be sheriff of the neighborhood is over." Jenkins looked up. "You know her?" "We met," I replied dryly. "She claims to be HOA president, but the actual board told me she was removed last year. Now she's been trespassing, posting fake notices, and calling 911 with false reports." "Lies," Karen yelled, pointing again. "He's dangerous. He threatened me." That was when I took a step back, reached into my back pocket, and pulled out the small leather case. I held it flat in my palm and slowly flipped it open. "A federal agent," I said calmly, letting the badge and ID catch the sunlight. "Currently on leave. You're standing on my property." Both officers went still. Their expressions changed instantly. Professional courtesy, military respect, whatever it was. I saw them shift their stance. Mills looked at Jenkins, then back to me, eyes slightly widened. "Sir, if you're an agent, why didn't you say so earlier?" "I don't wave it around unless I have to," I said. But I figured this was about the right time. Karen's voice cracked like a twig. "He's lying. That's fake. Anyone can buy a badge online. You want to test that theory?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "We can run it through Federal Dispatch right now." Mills nodded. "We don't need to. I've seen enough of the real thing to know." He turned toward Karen. "Ma'am, you said this was a squatting case. You failed to mention the owner had documentation or a federal ID," Karen stammered. "Didn't know you called 911 on a federal agent in his own home," I said. "And you've been harassing him for 2 days." Jenkins walked over to Karen, lowering his sunglasses. "Did you really post this sign here?" he asked, pointing to the large "No Trespassing" sign still staked in my yard. "Yes," she said defiantly, doubling down. "Because I have the right to protect the neighborhood. This house doesn't belong to him." I could see Jenkins was getting tired of her. "Ma'am, that's not your job. The HOA doesn't have the authority to determine legal ownership. That's for the county. And these documents show without doubt that this is Mr. Davis' home." Karen clenched her jaw. "He's not safe to be here. I don't feel safe." I held my ground. "You don't feel safe because you got caught trying to intimidate someone. You've nailed signs into my yard, attempted to enter my backyard, and now filed a false police report. That's not feeling unsafe. That's trying to abuse power." The air between us thickened with tension. A neighbor or two peeked from behind blinds. Another one came out on their porch. pretending to check mail, clearly watching the show. Karen was visibly sweating now, though she still tried to hold her posture, but it was crumbling quickly. Mills looked at me. Do you want to press charges, sir? I paused, looking at Karen. Her face was pale, her lips pursed like she was biting down a scream. I thought about letting it go, but then I remembered the sign, the backyard trespassing, the yelling, the lies. And I thought of every other quiet neighbor who probably never had the voice to stand up to her. Yes, I said. At the very least, I want a report filed for false reporting and harassment. She's not above the law, even if she thinks she is. Karen finally lost it. You can't do this to me. I am the law in this neighborhood. No, I replied. I am the law, and I'm giving you one last chance to step off this property and stop your nonsense. Otherwise, I'll have you charged under federal code. She stepped back like she'd been slapped, realizing that the power she thought she had just crumbled like dry leaves in the wind. Jenkins radioed in the incident, and Mills began writing down my statement. Karen, now shaking, stood frozen in her tracks. Eventually, they escorted her away. No cuffs, not yet, but a strong warning. They told her she was no longer allowed to approach or interfere with my property, and that any further contact could be considered criminal. I watched from my porch as she huffed and stumbled her way back to her house, her clipboard now hanging limply by her side like a defeated flag. When the cruisers pulled away, I finally took a deep breath. The adrenaline left my body like air, escaping a balloon. I sat back in my chair and sipped the no-melted iced tea. It wasn't the homecoming I expected, but it was the one I apparently needed. That evening, a few neighbors stopped by to say hello. Mr. Patel brought over homemade samosas and laughed at Karen's meltdown. You handled that better than I would have, he said. She's been a pain for years. A young couple from 2 doors down, Jess and Marvin, introduced themselves and thanked me. She's always hovering, Jess said. Last year she reported us for having an inflatable pool. Said it was a hazard to the community. We were too scared to fight it. Well, I replied with a smile. You don't have to be scared anymore. I'm not going anywhere. I spent the rest of the night on my porch light on, grill going, watching the neighborhood return to its usual rhythm. Kids rode bikes, a dog barked in the distance. The breeze rustled through the trees again, same as it had when I arrived. But now it felt different. Now it felt like mine again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. People like Karen don't give up. After one failure, they retreat. They regroup. And then they come back harder, more desperate, more irrational. I could feel it like a storm on the horizon. And if that storm came, I'd be ready for it, because now she knew who I was. And more importantly, she knew I wasn't the kind of man you could push around. 3 days passed with no sign of Karen. The neighborhood settled into a strange, almost too quiet calm. For a brief moment, I wondered if the shock of nearly being arrested and publicly embarrassed had finally shut her down. Maybe she'd finally accepted that I wasn't some pushover or easy target. I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew better. Narcissists don't surrender. They retreat, regroup, and look for their next angle. And when Karen came back, she didn't just come with her clipboard. She came with a plan. It started with a letter. I found it taped to my front door one morning, tucked inside a cheap plastic sleeve. It wasn't addressed or signed, but the style and tone were unmistakably Karen's. The letter was typed in bold, 12-point Times New Roman, as if she believed that formatting gave her words authority. She accused me again of violating HOA standards, stating that I had knowingly engaged in dangerous behavior, disturbed the neighborhood's peace, and intimidated residents with law enforcement presence. She claimed the HOA was actively reviewing my case and threatened legal action if I didn't voluntarily vacate the premises pending investigation. The HOA, I smirked as I finished reading. She was still pretending to represent them, but something about this time felt different, more organized. This wasn't just her scribbling on a clipboard. This letter was drafted carefully, with fake legalese and fabricated violations. Someone was helping her now. I walked inside and called the official HOA number listed on our community's welcome packet. A woman named Linda answered. Paulette, exhausted and immediately apologetic when I explained the situation. Oh no, her again. Linda sighed. Mr. Davis, we're so sorry. Karen has been harassing people under the HOA name for months. She prints her own forms, sends her own letters. We've told her to stop, even threatened legal action, but she just won't quit. She's acting like she still has power, I said, claiming she's backed by you. She's not. The board removed her after she tried to fine a family for using chalk on their driveway, and she keeps dragging people into her schemes, neighbor friends, even a cousin who pretends to be her legal advisor. Don't take anything she says seriously. I don't, I replied, but now she's escalating again. She filed a fake police report. If she crosses another line, I'm pressing full charges. Understood, Linda said. We'll send out a statement to the whole community again, just so everyone knows she has no authority. That should have been the end of it. But with Karen, nothing ended until she got humiliated beyond recovery or handcuffed, and she was nowhere near finished. The next day, a landscaping truck showed up in front of my house. A young guy in overalls got out and began unloading tools. Can I help you? I asked from my porch. Oh, I'm here to trim your hedges and level your backyard. HOA orders, he said, reading off a clipboard. Put that clipboard away and turn the truck around, I said calmly. You're trespassing. Wait what? This is private property. You've been misled. Whoever sent you isn't authorized. Leave before I report this. He stared at me for a second, then slowly nodded. Look man, I'm just doing what the lady told me. I don't want any trouble. He packed up and drove off. But the next day, a pool maintenance guy, then a fencing contractor. 3 days in a row, Karen had sent random service workers to my house under fake HOA work orders. It wasn't just annoying, it was strategic. She was trying to create chaos, trying to bait me into a reaction she could spin against me. On the 4th morning, I caught her standing across the street in a lawn chair just watching. Her arms were crossed. She had that smug expression, sipping something from a tall pink tumbler like she was the queen of the block. I walked across the street calmly, stopped a few feet from her, and said, "This is harassment, Karen." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said sweetly, not looking at me. "I'm just enjoying the morning." "Is it a crime to sit in a chair now?" "I've documented every single fake service call you made to my house," I replied. "You've impersonated the HOA again, and you've orchestrated a targeted harassment campaign. The next knock on your door won't be a neighbor, it'll be a federal subpoena." She turned her head slowly, smirked, and said, "We'll see about that." And just like that, she stood up and walked back inside that afternoon. Things reached a boiling point. I was in my garage organizing tools when I heard tires screech. I stepped outside to find a black SUV parked haphazardly in front of my driveway. A man and a woman got out dressed professionally, holding clipboards, IDs around their necks. "Mr. Davis," the man asked, "we're with the county zoning office. We received an anonymous complaint about illegal modifications to your property." I stared. "What kind of modifications?" The woman flipped through a folder. "Unpermitted structure work, outdoor fire hazards, to allegations of commercial activity on residential land." "None of that is true," I said firmly. "And I'm guessing I know who filed the complaint." The man nodded. "We get this sometimes, neighbors trying to weaponize code enforcement. We're just here to follow up." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'd like to file a counter-complaint for malicious targeting." "We can document that," the woman replied. "This seems like a pattern." I walked them around my property, showed them everything was exactly as it should be. No illegal structures, no hazards. They took photos, made some notes, and apologized for the inconvenience. As they left, I saw Karen watching from behind her curtain, barely peeking through like a cartoon villain. She had escalated to using government channels now. It wasn't just her word against mine. She was trying to manufacture a paper trail, trying to overwhelm me with a slow war of attrition that evening. I knew it was time to push back with force, but through the right channels. I compiled everything. Video footage from my security cams, scanned copies of the fake letters, logs of the service calls, and a copy of my conversation with the real HOA board. Then I called a friend, Agent Teresa Lynn, Internal Investigations. "You're back from deployment and already causing trouble," she joked when she picked up. "I didn't start it," I said, "but I need you to walk me through a harassment file, civil and criminal angles." After listening, Teresa grew serious. "You've got a strong case for federal harassment and impersonation of an authority, especially if she used official-looking HOA branding. Want me to draft something, please? I want it clean, airtight." "You got it, I'll mark it urgent. And Ray, if she pushes again, do not engage directly. Let us handle the next step." "I've tried that," I muttered. "She's a walking lawsuit." I stayed up late that night, didn't sleep much. Even though I'd faced far worse situations in other parts of the world, something about this was exhausting in a different way. Karen wasn't dangerous in the physical sense. She was dangerous in the way termites are: slow, quiet, corrosive. And if you don't deal with them early, they hollow out everything from the inside. But I had one thing she did in single quotes the law, and this time I was going to use every part of it. The next few days felt like the calm before a storm. I knew Karen hadn't stopped, she was simply regrouping. The way people like her operated wasn't impulsive, despite how it looked. She was calculating, patient when necessary, and obsessed with control. And when people like Karen feel that control slipping, they don't admit defeat, they strike back harder. But this time, I was ready. With Agent Teresa Lynn's help, we drafted a federal complaint document citing multiple instances of harassment, impersonation of authority, false reporting, and targeted intimidation against a federal employee on his own property. I submitted the full report to our internal legal department and shared copies with the county sheriff's office and the local police department. I also included an affidavit from the actual HOA president, confirming Karen's removal and detailing her history of fabricated authority. Within 48 hours, the pieces began moving. But before we took any action, I had one idea that would give us undeniable proof. It was a long shot, but it might corner Karen in a way she couldn't wiggle out of. Teresa approved it. "As long as it's clean," she said. "If we're going to nail her for real, we do it by the book." That's how the sting began. I posted a notice on the community bulletin board and emailed the HOA mailing list through Linda, the board president. The email said I'd be hosting a welcome back barbecue at my place the following weekend. inviting neighbors to stop by for food and drinks. Nothing fancy. Just a way to say hello again and thank the people who'd shown support. But I had a second reason. The cameras around my property were set to record audio now. I installed two more, one hidden inside a decorative light fixture on the porch and another angled toward the edge of my yard, just in case Karen tried to cause trouble again. And I made sure one of my fellow agents, Agent Rivas, would attend as an old army buddy. He was off duty but legally armed and wired for sound, just in case things got ugly. The day of the barbecue arrived sunny and warm. The grill sizzled, laughter echoed from the backyard, and the smell of burgers drifted into the air. About a dozen neighbors came through, some bringing sides, others simply offering kind words and handshakes. Jess and Marvin brought a tray of cupcakes. Mr. Patel told jokes that were older than I was. Everyone was relaxed. Everyone but her. Karen stood across the street again watching. She wasn't even trying to hide anymore. Sunglasses on, arms folded, her lips tight with disapproval. Her lawn chair had been replaced with a taller director-style seat, as if she were perched on a throne. She didn't say anything. Not yet. I knew she would. About 30 minutes into the gathering, Agent Rivas leaned in and said, "Red Queen is approaching." I turned toward the sidewalk. Karen was crossing the street, clipboard in hand, stomping like a general about to deliver bad news to the troops. I stayed calm. This was the moment we'd been waiting for. She walked right up to the edge of my driveway and said loudly, "This gathering is unauthorized. You're in violation of HOA social event policies. You didn't request approval." One of the neighbors laughed under their breath. I heard someone else mutter, "Here we go again." Karen raised her voice. "And according to Section 12-5 of the Community Standards Handbook, no amplified music or outdoor events exceeding 10 people are allowed without permission. You are disrupting the peace." I calmly stepped forward. "Karen, we've already been through this. You don't represent the HOA. I'm still on the advisory committee," she barked. "That gives me the right to enforce policy." "You were removed," I said firmly. "You have zero authority." She turned to Agent Rivas, who was holding a plate of ribs. "And who? Are you another trespasser? Are you even a resident?" Rivas looked up, cool as ever. "I'm visiting my buddy. You got a problem with that?" Karen's face darkened. "Yes, I do. This event is a safety concern and I'm going to report it right now." She pulled out her phone and dialed on speakerphone for all to hear. "Yes, hello," she said with dramatic flair. "There's a loud, unauthorized party happening at 1427 Maple Lane. I believe there's alcohol, and I suspect someone might be armed. I don't feel safe." There it was, the lie. She had just falsely reported an armed person at a peaceful barbecue. I looked up at the security cam on the porch. The mic had picked up everything. I could already hear the sirens. I turned to Rivas and said quietly, "She just triggered a false weapon report. We've got her." 10 minutes later, a cruiser rolled up, then another. They parked along the curb and stepped out cautiously, hands near their belts. Karen strutted toward them like a queen delivering a personal tour of the crime scene. "I told you," she said, pointing toward me. "That's him. He has a weapon. And he's hosting an unregistered event." One of the officers, Officer Baker, stepped forward. He was the same officer who'd responded to Karen's earlier 911 stunt. He looked at me. "Mr. Davis's weapon." I nodded and gestured to Rivas. "My guest is a federal agent, off-duty, legally carrying. You're welcome to verify." Rivas pulled out his credentials calmly. "Agent Miguel Rivas here for the stake." Baker sighed and looked toward Karen. "Ma'am, you called in a report of a possible armed threat." "There is a weapon," she said. "That man has a gun. He's a licensed federal officer," Baker said. "There's no threat, no crime." Karen's voice rose again. "They're disturbing the peace. They've got loud music. It's a Bluetooth speaker playing Sinatra," I said. "Do you want to file a noise complaint for that?" At that point, Linda, the actual HOA president, arrived. She had received the email invitation and showed up just in time, holding a pie. "Karen, stop embarrassing yourself," Linda said flatly. "We've told you countless times you're not in charge anymore." Karen turned bright red. I have every right to protect this neighborhood." "No," I said, stepping forward. "You had the right to act like a decent human being. Instead, you forged letters, sent fake contractors to my home, and filed multiple false reports, including a fake weapon complaint today." Karen froze. "That's a federal offense," I continued. "And we've got it all on record, audio, video, timestamps, eyewitnesses." "You're bluffing," she whispered. "No, I'm not," said Agent Rivas. "And this time, you're done." Baker turned to his partner and said, "Let's get her statement, then we'll call it in." Karen's eyes went wide. "You can't arrest me. You can't arrest someone for trying to keep their neighborhood safe. You can when you lie to law enforcement about a firearm," I said. "You're not just a nuisance now. You're a threat to public safety." It didn't take long after that. Karen was escorted away, not in cuffs yet, but in the back of a cruiser, red-faced and silent. The officers promised they would complete the report and forward it to the district attorney's office. Teresa confirmed it the next morning. Karen would be formally charged for false emergency reporting. impersonation of an official entity, and targeted harassment of a federal employee. And I didn't even have to lift a finger. Well, maybe just one. To press save on the security footage. The neighborhood felt lighter after that, like a pressure valve had finally been released. Neighbors stopped walking on eggshells. Kids played outside again. People greeted each other without fear of being spied on or judged. Jess and Marvin said it best when they came by that evening. Didn't just deal with her, Jess said. You freed all of us. 3 weeks after Karen was escorted from my barbecue in the back of a police cruiser, the quiet that returned to the neighborhood wasn't just ordinary silence, it was relief. The kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the leaves are, it's still wet but the air smells clean. The mood on Maple Lane had shifted. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now waved across fences. Porch lights glowed a little warmer at night. There was laughter again, even from houses that had gone dim during Karen's reign of passive-aggressive tyranny. But for me, the storm wasn't over, not yet. The legal process had kicked in quickly after her latest false report. The DA office moved forward with charges: 3 misdemeanors and 1 felony. Filing a false report involving a firearm, impersonation of a public official, harassment, and misuse of emergency services. It was more than enough to set a legal precedent. And while Karen was released pending trial, a restraining order was placed immediately. She was barred from coming within 100 feet of my property. If she even looked at me sideways, she'd be back, in handcuffs for the first time in a long time. I could breathe still. I couldn't help but feel the unfinished edges of it all. In my work as a federal agent, we're trained to remain objective, stick to facts, stay detached, complete the mission. But this wasn't just another case. This was personal, not just because Karen had tried to dismantle my life with petty vendettas and fake authority, but because she had abused the same systems meant to protect us. I thought about the neighbors who had suffered before me, the family who had their daughter's chalk art power washed off the driveway, the elderly man whose garden was too colorful for community standards and was fined $200, the young couple fined for parking their car 1 inch too close to the curb. Karen's war hadn't started with me, but I was going to make sure it ended with me. One afternoon, I got a call from the local community center. They were planning to hold a neighborhood town hall. I had barely unpacked half my boxes since returning from deployment. But Linda, the HOA president, asked if I'd consider attending. We need to talk openly, she said. People are still afraid of her. I think if you speak, it'll help them move on. I paused. You want me to give a speech? I want you to show them that we're not powerless anymore. So I agreed. That Saturday I showed up to the community center in jeans and a simple polo. Nothing flashy, no badge, no suit. Just me. The room was packed, nearly every seat filled. Folding chairs creaked, a projector buzzed in the background, and Linda opened the meeting with a brief apology for the HOA's failure to address Karen sooner. There was scattered applause, nervous laughter, and then she called me up. I wasn't a public speaker, but I knew what needed to be said. I stepped up to the microphone, took a breath, and looked around at the faces of people who had, like me, once felt powerless on their own street. I'm not here to talk about titles or badges, I began. I'm not here because I'm a federal agent. I'm here because I'm your neighbor. And like many of you, I came home hoping for peace. A few nods from the front rows. When I returned, I expected to deal with dust, maybe a few weeds, harassment, threats, and someone calling 911 to get me kicked out of my own home. Karen didn't just cross a line, she trampled it. Not just with me, but with many of you. Now the room was listening closely. She operated under the illusion of authority. And most of us let her because we didn't want to make waves. Because we were tired, or scared, or just too busy to fight back. I get it, but here's the truth. The moment we stop standing up for what's right, we give people like her permission to rule by fear. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. I didn't fight her with threats or arguments. I fought her with facts, with the law, with truth. And that's what won. I let the silence linger for a second, then ended with this. Bullies lose their power when good people stop being silent. The applause that followed wasn't wild or explosive. It was the kind that starts slow, but builds strong, unified. It wasn't for me. It was for all of us. After the meeting, several people came up to shake my hand. Some shared their own Karen stories, quiet acts of tyranny that they'd endured in silence. A few even offered to help me with yard work or bring dinner by sometime. It wasn't about favors. It was about community, rebuilding trust after so much damage had been done. But there was still one last chapter in Karen's story. Her trial was set for the following month. The DA's office didn't want jail time, but they wanted accountability. A plea deal was floated, community service, a fine, and mandatory psychological evaluation. Karen's lawyer tried to spin it, claiming she was misunderstood, that she was simply protecting neighborhood integrity, but the judge wasn't having it. The video evidence from my security cameras, her threats, her lies, the false report about a weapon spoke louder than any attorney ever could. In the end, Karen pleaded guilty to 2 charges, filing a false police report and harassment. She was fined $5,000 and sentenced to 150 hours of community service. and barred from holding any HOA-affiliated position for the next 5 years. The impersonation charge was dropped as part of the deal, but her reputation, that was beyond repair. The last time I saw her was at a roadside cleanup site near the freeway. Orange vest, gloves, and a trash picker in hand. She didn't look up. When I passed, I didn't need her to. Her fall from self-appointed power wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. Consequences. Back on Maple Lane, life carried on. I fixed up the garden, planted new shrubs, laid fresh mulch. I even repainted the old mailbox Karen once complained about. My neighbors began hosting small gatherings again. Kids chalked up driveways, and the HOA, with Linda's help, finally revised their bylaws to include protections against abuse of authority and false reporting. Peace had returned, not just to my home but to the entire neighborhood. One night, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, Marvin stopped by with his toddler. The little girl handed me a drawing stick, figures under a blue sky, one of them holding what looked like a badge. "Is that me?" I asked, smiling. "She says that's you being the hero." Marvin chuckled. "She saw the video of the barbecue. Said you looked like the sheriff from her cartoons." I laughed. "I guess I'll take that." But in truth, I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt like a man who refused to be pushed out of his own home. A man who believed that the law should protect the innocent, not be used as a weapon for the petty or the power-hungry. And maybe that's enough, because sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens or spotlights. Sometimes it comes with a quiet evening on your own porch where you belong. If you enjoyed this powerful real-life story, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Bright Reality for more shocking true stories that reveal the truth behind closed doors.